Welcome to the ADNA Presents. This is Roy Samuelson, and today we have a very special guest, Lynn Wissner. Lynn is a casting director. She is a coach, and she's also a voice actor. As we had talked about earlier, she's a Jackie of all trades. Thanks for joining us, Lynn.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Roy. This is fun.
What do you love about audio description?
First place, I love that you introduced me to it because I really was not that aware of it a few years ago. Diving in, what I really like is that for me, especially when I watch sort of shows that are accented or really involved with dialogue and things like that, I sometimes get so focused on the dialogue that I stop paying attention to what's happening visually. And then it's almost like, when you read a section of a book and you go, wait, what did I just read? And you want to go back. It helps me with that. I'm a very visual person, but also I'm a very auditory person. So I think sometimes my brain just gets overwhelmed and I need that extra little help with it. So for me, that's where I have found it really beneficial to kind of just aid me in that discovery of a show or a film or something like that.
We've talked about a lot of different approaches for audio description for both sighted and blind people. And this is one of the first times that I've heard about, obviously because of your experience as a casting director and a coach, you're so literally attuned to it.
Yeah.
That's where you go. And it's neat to hear about how that experience with audio description can enhance the visuals for you in that capacity, I guess.
Absolutely. And people's voices, when they're doing audio description, I really zone in on because certain voices, it's almost like an audiobook. Sometimes I'm not as drawn to a narrator. And I don't know, again, if that's just because of my 30 plus years in the voiceover business, but certain voices, I get really drawn into it the way they're describing something. So I feel like they are telling me a story, even though they're also just describing what's happening. It's a really beautiful marriage of storytelling and explaining and holding my hand through something very visual at the same time.
You're one of my first exposures to voiceover, and it's been great to learn from you and be coached by you and watch you coach others throughout our many years, at least my many years.
Yeah, we go way back.
Yeah, we do. I think about how much your contribution to what voice talent work is, the skills itself. There's a lot of things that work and that don't work, and trust your coaching to go into the minutia and the details of that for people. But I'm curious if you could give us an overview about what draws you to the voice, specifically within audio description. And maybe it might be relevant for other voiceover work, but what draws you in? What do you pay attention to? What works for you, or maybe even what doesn't work for you when you're hearing that story being told?
I think for me, and again, I think it really is a very personal thing. I am drawn to a voice, whether it's a voiceover actor for a commercial, a narration piece, an audiobook, even telephony, where they're saying for customer service, press 1, and even audio description. There has to be some kind of connection in the voice. And some people don't have that. I can't quite give you the perfect description of it because I think it is personal. And I think I just know it when I hear it. I was listening to some actors' demos this morning, and there's some people you just go, nope, they're never going to make it. There's just something that I don't connect. And again, I'm not the be all that ends all, but I'm certainly, as a casting director, somebody that, I've been doing this long enough, I can figure out when somebody's going to connect with other listeners out there. So when it comes to audio description, again, even though you have to be sort of removed and not have an editorial or an emotional connection necessarily to what you're saying, because you're just describing a scene, I still personally want to feel, like I said earlier, kind of like you're holding my hand through it, because I think that there's a vulnerability when you're not aware of what's happening on camera, or you can't see it, or else, like I said earlier, I get so invested in the dialogue, I stop paying attention. There's a definite connection that people should have in their communication as well as the sound of their voice.
I like how you put that connection. And you'd said earlier, too, about being invested in the story. And if those two things are related, my assumption of audio description narration is that it is that high wire act of being a part of the story, but it's at a certain level. We're a part of telling the story, as you had said, but that connection is still there. For example, I can't say, she goes into the pit of hell and fights the demon. That, like, unless it's a comedy, that's, the stakes aren't high, and there's that disconnection that happens. And I hear you saying also that is subjective, that there's certain things that maybe you like and that maybe somebody else wouldn't like, that there is that relativity. But I can only imagine that as a casting director, that those things you really do pick up on. It's got to be second nature to you because you've been doing it, but you get something about that connection Maybe we could expand a little bit more about that connection, maybe not specifically in audio description. When you do connect, what's happening? Is it the stories being told? Are you focused on the voice? Are you focused on the story being told?
This is something I always bring up in my coaching as well. You could have the most beautiful voice on the planet, but if you can't connect or you can't act, you're just reading. And I always tell voice actors 90% of voiceover and acting, especially in commercials, it's nothing to do with the voice. We all think it is, and everybody gets so worried about how do I sound? How do I sound? But it's really about, does it sound like you're talking to me? That's what I want to hear. I don't want to hear you're reading to me. I don't need readers. I need it to sound like you're sitting next to me on the couch talking to me as we're watching that commercial or watching that show on Discovery, and it's a beautiful narrative piece. In my coaching experience, and even when I'm listening back to casting sessions, that's always sort of my first question. Yes, I do pay attention to somebody's voice, but then I always ask myself, okay, does it sound like he's talking to me or does it sound like he's reading to me? I don't need readers. I always joke, I can get my mom to do that. I need it to sound like you're talking to me, because I think intrinsically and sort of maybe subliminally, when we're watching a commercial and we feel that connection, we don't even know we feel it, and it sounds like somebody's talking to us, we're then drawn to the product or we're drawn to the story. And it is definitely an art form. And again, as a casting director, I get so many people, I have such a great voice, or I've been doing this for, whatever. And it's like, that's great. Good for you. You got a great voice. But can you really talk to me and not sound like you're reading to me? So that's where my ear goes. In casting, I think maybe one of the testaments to my skill with that is that I've had ad agency clients and production companies. Some of them have been so loyal for decades because they know I hear that and that's what they want. So I feel very, very fortunate for that. But again, I don't know if my ear is just trained over all these years to do that, or it's just something in me that I'm drawn to. But there is definitely a difference.
Wow. I love how you said that, being drawn to the story. And
Yeah.
I mean, the proof is in the consistency of your clients coming back to you, being able to recognize that. In your own personal experience as a voice talent, a voice actor, do you find that there are certain things that you've learned from how you coach other people in voice acting?
Yeah, it's hard. Voiceover is hard. I grew up as a kid actor, so I have that acting experience. I did on-camera commercials in high school and college, so I'm very familiar with that, and I've taken acting and things like that. I admit I'm not good at certain things, and so I don't try to go out for those things. And I get intimidated by other actors just as well as anybody else does. But I find in my coaching, again, one of the benefits of casting is you learn so much from other talent, whether me casting them and having them in the booth and working and directing them in a casting session. I've learned so much just watching and listening to some of the greats out there. So I have used some of those tools not only as a talent, but in my coaching as well. So I'm very fortunate that I've had a front row seat to some amazing talent and have been able to kind of absorb things that they've done. Doesn't mean I do it great, but I try. And I work on it and learn from it. And yeah, you're going to learn things that don't work for you. And you just, okay, toss that. I always say, don't cloud your brain with so much information that you get overwhelmed. But it has definitely helped in some ways, for sure.
It's funny you say that about clouding the brain. I think about a lot of the eagerness and excitement that I had getting into voiceover and how that created this, I want to do it all. I want to do it all. And I didn't want to lose any opportunity. And I was so focused on not being focused. And it made it hard to develop a specific craft in one particular area because I was spreading myself so wide. So I'd do a little bit here and a little bit there, but I wasn't really narrowing in. In audio description, I found that that is definitely something that I and many other people have narrowed in on and have found ways to grow. And one of the things that I learned from you, whether it's the auditions or the bookings, that when I listen back to something that I've done, it makes such a difference, whether it's I record it and then listen right back, or I record it, wait an hour and then listen back, or wait a day or wait a week, or even wait a few months, that it changes my own perception of what I intended at the time I was recording and then what I'm actually doing. It's almost like tuning the instrument.
Yes.
And recognizing I've got something different. And I'm curious, let's combine these two thoughts, that tuning the instrument and also that time distance and focus. I know I'm collecting a lot of stuff and shoving it all together here. Can we talk about any of that?
I do find it very beneficial if you have the time when you do an audition to step away. after a while, even if it's just a minute or two. Step away from it. If you have the luxury that you can step away from it 24 hours later and then listen back to it, you get a good perspective, because sometimes, you're in your booth and you're sort of just in a zone and you're going through auditions or whatever it is. And I've heard auditions back that I've done where I was just like, oh my God, it's so on, or it's just so over the top, or whatever it's been, or, oh, you know what? I like that. Why didn't I book that? I think there's a great, valuable opportunity that can be had if you can have that luxury to step back and then go back to it. A lot of times we don't have that. We have to get something in yesterday. But it is definitely helpful, and it kind of helps you see how you've grown or not grown, or oops, I forgot to do what my coach suggested. Part of being an actor, I don't care if you're a voice actor or a sitcom actor or stage or whatever it is always opening yourself up to learn and kind of grow from that. Because I think if you close yourself off and don't sort of keep your ears open or your eyes open, there's opportunities out there that you could really be missing. I mean, I'm always listening. Even when I'm at a restaurant, I'm listening to people talking, or I'm watching people. It's kind of my voyeuristic nature. But I think that's just a really valuable part of not only being an actor, but being a human. You can learn so much by watching people and listening to people.
That listening and that growth that we try to do, that learning, I think is where I initially got stuck. Back to that spreading the net too wide, that it's hard to reconcile. Okay, I'm always ready to learn. And also I want to do everything. I see that focus that we as voice talents say, hey, I really want to narrow in on this one particular thing and I want to grow here, but I want to keep learning from other aspects too. There's got to be a balance here.
I don't know many voice actors that are good at every single genre. It's just kind of hard to do. And you have to be very open to that. You have to be very accepting of that, you know what, I'm not that great at animation, so I'm not going to bug my agent about that, or just accept it and move on. The beauty of voiceover is there's so many genres, from audio description to telephony to e-learning to narrations to promos and video games and audiobooks and so on, that people can really find their niche and then really cultivate work from that. It's not easy, as you and I know. If you spread yourself too thin, I think then eventually it kind of affects your performance, because you put that pressure on yourself. And the voice is so telling. Even if I don't know an actor and I get their audition, I can just hear, oh, that person's having a bad day. You can just hear it. My ears are that sensitive, I think. Embrace what you're really good at and then kind of run with it.
Let's continue on the casting director side, if I may. If there's something that you're comfortable with sharing publicly about what voice actors do that works really well for you, something that makes things work for you when you're doing your casting.
There's a few things that obviously I, as a casting director, always appreciate seeing actors that train and study. Even if they're very successful, it's kind of impressive when, wow, they're taking some more classes, and good for them, staying on top of the trends, because trends change in commercial, they change in animation, they change in games, things kind of change. So I think as a voice actor, again, going back to no matter what kind of actor you are, I think that's very important to train. I'm a casting director that kind of loves when actors do lead-ins and ad-libs. I know some other ones aren't particularly fond of that. I've just found that it separates you. Think of things that you can do a little bit different, because I'm listening to 500 other actors on that audition reel, and you all sound the same to me. I always say to actors, I don't mean that disrespectfully, but you fit the specs. That's why you got the copy. So you're all basically going to sound the same on that audition reel. So think about what can you do to stand out and kind of jump off my desktop. So I'm like, oh, wow, I want to keep listening to this person. It's harder in voiceover because it's not like on camera where we can go, I'm going to wear that super fluorescent shirt. They're going to remember me. So think of that fluorescent shirt and how you can put that in your voice or something. Think about ways that you can sort of jump off my desktop.
I love it. Yes. Let's pivot around to a different role. You as an audience member, whether you're listening to animation or a narrative TV show, that there's certain things that you as an audience member experience. I think you've already addressed this when you were talking about the connection and hearing the story. Is there anything else that you could talk about when it comes to when you disengage as a coach or a casting director or a voice actor and you're just being an audience? What really works for you?
I'm a big fan of phrasing. I don't know why I'm attracted to that, especially like on a narrative piece. I think that's why we love listening to somebody like Morgan Freeman or even Jeff Bridges. I've directed him before. They have interesting phrasing. They don't just say the linear line. They each have a way of taking three words and then that stands. That's something that I'm always sort of like, oh, I perk up and listen to that. So that's just me. But I think ultimately, maybe that's why they are popular narrators. And some of these bigger actors like Liev Schreiber, I mean, his voice is gorgeous. And he knows how to tell a story. He has a way of pulling you in. He doesn't just hit the action words. There's something about they know how to caress certain words or certain phrases. I think it's a very individual thing, but that's personally where I get drawn into somebody's, especially a narrative read, is their phrasing and maybe the way they let a sentence kind of hang. That's where I get more pulled into a story.
Sounds really playful to hear that approach, that caressing. I think about conversational being such a buzzword in voice talent, and it's great to be conversational in the idea of bringing the words out from the script. So it doesn't sound like you're reading, as you had said earlier, don't read. But I feel like that conversational isn't necessarily enough. There's got to be something behind it. Maybe that's where the story comes in. Maybe that's where those phrases being caressed by those names that you had mentioned comes in. Any thoughts on that as far as conversational or taking it to the next level?
Conversational is always going to draw somebody in because, yeah, then it sounds like you're talking to that person. And that's what we want. If you look at films or narrative pieces or even like old time movie reels, remember way back, you'd watch a movie from the 30s or 40s and they always had the newsreel beforehand. And they're just sort of barking at you. They're just reading their statements. They're like one line statements that they keep reading versus how it would be done now. I think we've evolved as far as audience members and participants in a story. Even if you're just sitting there on your couch with your bowl of popcorn watching Discovery Channel, you get more drawn into it when it sounds like the person's kind of holding your hand and talking you through what we're seeing. I can be like the jaded, bored casting director that's listened to thousands and thousands of voices. But when I feel like, oh, wow, I'm on that journey with that voice, then I'm so much more drawn to the story.
Boy, there's so many parallels for audio description narrators to take from this. Thank you so much for sharing all this. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience?
Keep doing what you're doing. It's valuable. It's so necessary. And what I love, and I'm so proud of you for this, that you seem to have really elevated the art of audio description. And it's not just somebody reading lines. You have really sort of elevated the art form of it that I think was needed and brought this really beautiful accompaniment to a story that we're watching. And it's not something that is just boring. It's really necessary and valuable to a visual piece. So I'm excited for you and your colleagues that do audio description, because I think they have really, like I said, elevated the art form of it and shown us, wow, this could be something that's really valuable and takes this piece to another level rather than just, he opens the door, he shuts the door. There's more emotional attachment to it, which I think only makes the viewer or the listener more invested in the story ultimately.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people that are listening to this interview with you will see how the impact of your coaching and our experience together, the things that you've already mentioned here, whether it's being drawn into the story or the connection that you started off with, that all of these things have impacted how I've approached voiceover in general and how that opportunity seems to be so clearly available for audio description narrators. So I'd like to reflect that back to you as well for your coaching and all the other people, not just myself, that have learned from you and grown their career because of the expertise that you've been willing to share thanks to your energy and commitments to us. So back at you.
Thank you. Thank you. I love it.
Are there any places we can follow you, social media, websites?
So you can follow me on Instagram. I'm under Voices Voice Casting. That's the name of my company. Facebook, it's just my name, Mary Lynn Wissner. Voices Voice Casting, I think, is under that. But we also have the VO Pros, which is our workshops and classes where I have guest casting directors. You've been one of our guest directors. I've had producers, casting directors, coaches. It's a platform for voice actors to get training. Voices Voice Casting is our website. I also have a thing called the VO Roadshow, where it's me and a few other coaches, and we travel around and have done a coaching session in New York, or we have a full day of coaching. I do commercials. Jeff Howell does promos or dubbing. Scott Parkin does improv and so on. I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Mary Lynn Wissner. I think that's all my platforms.
And thanks so much for joining us here. This has been a wonderful interview to hear about our voiceover approach to audio description.
Well, thank you for having me. I adore you. It's fun to be interviewed by you. This was a treat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.